What's going on, everybody? I am here tonight, another episode of the Factory Tour with Tim Riley, another DFF analyst. We're back to the old stuff. We're back to, our own people. I'm going to talk to Tim tonight. You can find him on Twitter at FF_Rees. He actually hosts another podcast called the Fantasy Frontline. He's hosting all by himself right now, which is kind of scary to me. I like having a guest as like my little security blanket, but yeah, go check him out. He's doing that over there, the Fantasy Frontline. Tim, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Paul. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'm ready to get into it. I know we had a fun draft a couple days ago.
Yeah, startup draft, mock draft. Unfortunately, I kind of wish it was real, but yeah, we did a little startup mock draft with the DFF crew. We're putting together a little startup draft guide, actually. So we did 15 rounds. All the picks are going to have write-ups attached. There's going to be a little strategy piece attached to that. So that's coming to the DFF website. But we're going to talk about how that mock draft went today, specifically diving into my team, Tim's team, and then talk a little bit about the general draft, some of the best values, some of the worst, some trends that we noticed. So right off the top here, we're going to jump right in, but let me give the details, give you the lay of the land. This startup mock draft, this is a 12-team league, Superflex, PPR, 1.5 tight end premium, and we just treated it like a regular start 10 league. So pretty much your default Dynasty settings at this point, at least, in the Dynasty Twitter streets. So no weird settings or anything, just kind of a normal Dynasty startup draft. I was drafting out of the 101 spot. Of course, I never get it in real startups, but I got it for the mock draft, so that's great. And then Tim was drafting from the 110. So before we get into it, Tim, did you like that spot, or do you have like a preferred draft slot that you like to be in?
Oh man, I love the 110. It's not where I want to be at all. It's just kind of in that area where the first round I want to take quarterback. that's just how I am. I want a quarterback. I want one of those top 7 or 8 guys, and you're just out of reach of it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I definitely want quarterbacks in the first round, and 110 kind of tends to get you into that next tier where I can definitely justify taking some guys there, but it doesn't feel like I'm getting a value. It's like I kind of have to reach a little bit, especially if you go by ADP to get that quarterback. So you did not go quarterback with that first pick. We will get into it. We'll see who you did take. I like the 101. I think it's the best spot to be in. If I was ever given the option to pick my draft slot, I would always take the 101, even in third round reversal. I just think the advantage that you can get from a Patrick Mahomes and, to somewhat the same extent, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, is just, it's unmatched. And I think it's worth getting the worst players with those later, those next couple of picks, just to lock in that advantage, that, top end quarterback option for the next decade plus. So I took Patrick Mahomes with my first pick, of course. I only have him in one other dynasty league. So that's why I say I wish this was a real draft. I wish I could have added another share of Mahomes, but unfortunately my write-up will have to do. But yeah, so I'll go over the rest of my roster here. Like I said, we only did 15 picks, so I won't belabor you with 28, 29 names here, but I took Patrick Mahomes 101, and then Christian McCaffrey and Chris Olave, Devontae Adams, Rhamondre Stevenson, J.K. Dobbins, Calvin Ridley, Matthew Stafford, Greg Dulcich, Sam Howell, David Montgomery, Elijah Mitchell, Nico Collins, Skyy Moore, and Dwayne McBride. Those were my 15 picks. And Tim's going to kind of give me a little cross-examination here. He's going to try to poke some holes in some of these picks, and I'll defend my takes. I'll defend them to the death. But before we get into that, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the general strategy was going through my head as I put this team together. Like I said, Mahomes was a no-brainer at the top, but after that, I wasn't exactly sure which direction the team was going to go. Just kind of going to let the board fall to me and make my decision that way. When I came back up on the clock at 212 and Christian McCaffrey was there, I thought, that was a value I just frankly couldn't pass up. And I just kind of decided I was going to go with more of like a win now construction, which is something I've really been coming around on recently. I used to do a lot of productive struggle type drafts where I would, draft with the intention of tanking year one in order to hit the ground running in year 2. But I've really been coming around on this idea of contending right out of the gate. I talked to Jacob Sanderson last week. We went over rebuilding and contending, and he kind of helped me to understand just how much EV you're really losing in a tanking season. Not to say that it's never necessary or that you can't benefit from it, but you are giving up a lot by making that decision. So when you have the opportunity to build a competitive team right out of the gate, I think that's something more people should be open to, especially with so many teams drafting these days with the intention to trade down, draft rookies, pick up rookie picks. There's so many teams trying to do that now that it's almost beneficial to kind of zig when other people zag and try to build a competing team. You might only be competing against like 5 or 6 other teams in that first year. So it might be your best opportunity really to kind of steal a win. Do you think that that's true? Like, is there something to be gained, with recent trends and like building a competitive roster right away?
Yeah, I think we as a dynasty community have really just foregone the act of winning. Like, the value is way more important than winning, which is absolutely ridiculous. Like, it's so easy to build a win now roster. You know what I mean? Like, you're getting what you got, Christian McCaffrey, the RB. You can make an argument for RB2 right there with Brees Hall. You're getting him at the end of the second round. Devontae Adams, who's not really reliant on like athleticism or speed or anything like that. Like, he can play until he's 33 and be elite, and I wouldn't be shocked in the slightest. So you're getting a top 5, top 10 dynasty wide receiver, and you're getting him at the end of the 4th round. And I think the age cliff has been massively overrated right now, and it's really the best time to build a win now roster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's definitely a little bit of age panic because it is about the value. It's about, can I trade this player away in the future? And I do understand that because it can be really difficult to maintain a high value dynasty team. And it's scary, the idea that valuable players can go to 0 on your roster and you have to find a way to replace that. Otherwise, you're going to be behind. You're going to have to tank. So it's a scary proposition. It pushes players down the board. In the past, I have been wary of taking them, and I'm forcing myself to be more open to it. Of course, in a mock draft, it's pretty easy to make those decisions because I know it's not a real team. But I have drafted Devontae Adams a few times in this range throughout the offseason, and it definitely is. It feels good. Like, if it feels like I'm getting an elite producer, at a discount. So I love that. My actual favorite pick, though, if I'm not allowed to say Mahomes because that's too easy, would be J.K. Dobbins. I think at the 6-12, just because. Yeah, just because, I liked him more than a couple of backs that went ahead of him, namely Derrick Henry and Kenneth Walker. I'm not really, Henry just due to the age, and I think he is showing a little bit of wear. I don't like that offense this year. And then Walker, I think there's a lack of ceiling there, and I don't necessarily care that he's a couple of years younger. Like, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. So I'm really high on Dobbins. A year removed from the ACL, I think the Ravens offense is primed to explode. There's really no other competition on the roster for him. I think this really could be the year he puts it all together. And just to get him that late, where I think not only was he a value, but I think he was the last guy in the tier. Like, there wasn't another running back taken for a full round. So
yeah,
it's just nice when that kind of happens naturally, where you end up getting a guy you like, who's at the last guy in that range that I can get and really solidify that running back room. So I'd call that my favorite pick. My least favorite pick, coincidentally, was immediately afterwards. So I do like Calvin Ridley. I'm a fan. I've acquired some shares this offseason. I think he has a good shot to rebound. But I do think here at the 701, I think it may have been a little bit of a reach. I do have trouble navigating these mid-round wide receivers. I think it's difficult for me to weigh like their immediate ceilings against the years they have remaining and, the upside and the floor. It really trips me up. I always have trouble in this range. Typically, I just try to trade down and take whoever's left. But I think you could make a good case there for taking Ayuk over him, Marquise Brown, Debo Samuel. I don't know if I picked the right guy. And I don't know, looking back on it, it just feels like I could have gone some different directions there. So it's kind of my overview. Do you have thoughts on Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, I feel like Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk are both huge question marks, specifically just because of Calvin Ridley's absence from the NFL. For me personally, I probably would have went Hollywood because I know he's going to get the targets over there. But really, you're talking about 7, 8 wide receivers here that are all in the same tier, and so you just kind of go with your gut. You were kind of in that unfortunate one. What were you at? The 7-1, where it's the last pick, and you're not gonna see another pick for a whole round, which seems like forever in a startup. So just yeah,
Exactly. Just felt
I'm
like I had to grab one, and I just like, I don't know. I don't know that I grabbed the right one. I think there is a good argument for Hollywood because I do think like I think Ridley might have the slightly higher ceiling, but I think they both have decent ceilings. And Marquise Brown is a little younger, clearer
mhm.
target distribution. Like, yeah. So if I could go back, I'd probably pick someone else there. Don't think it's like a disastrous pick by any stretch, but probably my least favorite that I did make. So no, just looking at the show sheet, that definitely wasn't your least favorite of my picks. You've
No.
picked out a couple of players that you want me to defend. Maybe you disagree with the pick. Maybe you're just curious about why I took them. I don't know. I haven't asked you. You haven't told me. But go ahead and put my feet to the fire a little bit. Who's a guy I took that kind of has you maybe scratching your head a little bit?
Okay. Um. First of all, I would like to say your team is probably one of my favorite teams from this draft. Like, I don't know. I felt like I was in a weird spot where, if I picked your team as my favorite, it's because I'm on your show. But if I pick my team, it's, because I'm conceited.
Yeah, I went ahead and picked an outside candidate for my favorite, just to avoid that whole mess. But thank you, I appreciate it. I think Mahomes definitely helps make any team look better. But yeah, I
Oh,
think it was
yeah.
a solid draft.
Well, yeah, I really like a lot of what you did with Stafford and how they're late. I think Stafford is a massive value, but a few players that get back on track. Some players that I really kind of had question marks about. First, we're gonna go with Rhamondre at the 5-1. I think Rhamondre could be a hit this year, but in a dynasty league, I don't know about spending a 5th round pick right there. The 5-1 on Rhamondre, you got Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston,
Mhm.
just a couple other guys there in that tier where New England has shown us that they just don't really commit to the running back position for multiple years. So for me at the 5-1, it was just a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, I think Rhamondre is one of those guys where you're either in on him or you're not, and I am in on him. He sold me last year, like you know, for what it's worth, I did pick him exactly on his ADP, which is kind of crazy. His ADP is 501 per bulletproof. So not a reach technically. But yeah, I am sold. He was 10th in points per game last season at the running back position at 14.7. If you take out the game he left early, it was 15.3. Slight difference, slightly higher. He also started a little slow with Damian Harris kind of being the lead guy for the first 2 weeks before he got injured. So I guess what I'm looking at with Rhamondre is a guy who last year proved he definitely has that mid RB1 potential
Mm-hmm.
where, he can take on a huge share of the opportunities. He was third in running back targets last season. He was sixth in routes run. He had over 200 carries. He's big. He catches passes. He has basically no competition in the backfield. Like I don't find the ghost of Ty Montgomery and Pierre Strong to be particularly imposing running backs. Like they released James Robinson. I totally hear the idea that the Patriots haven't been like a one back show in a long time, but I
Mm-hmm.
also think sometimes the personnel weighs in here, and I think I just don't know that they've had a guy like this that can do all these things in a long time. And I think they saw what he could do last year, and just all the moves that they've made since don't really indicate to me that they're looking to pull him back. So I just like him as a guy who's 25 years old. I think he's as strong a candidate as you can find at this point in the draft to finish as a top 5 running back this season. At which point, maybe they don't re-sign him, or maybe they do re-sign him and they add more competition. I don't know. But if he does finish top 5 at age 25, I don't really think he's going to lose a lot of value. Like I can probably resell him at that point. And I do think he's a good player. So it's kind of one of those things where, he'll either have trade value or, he'll land on another team and he'll continue to be a bell cow because I do think that he's really good. And so that's a price where I was willing to buy in, knowing I was competing this year, grab that second stud running back.
Yeah, I hear you. I think it definitely works for your team build to go for it right now to get that second, running back that could really boost your team's production. I'm not personally completely sold on Rhamondre. I'm more of like mid fifth, a little later than ADP. Right after like those running backs that kind of went before him, Addison, Johnston, even Kirk Cousins was right there at 5'4". But I understand your reasoning, and I do think it was a beneficial move for your team.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Is there someone else?
Yeah, we're next one. It's going to be Greg Dulcich at the 9-1. That was a little bit much for me. I think with the punting of the tight end, I guess you could say, the 9th round on Dulcich was just a little too out of my range, considering, in a lot of drafts right now, you're looking at Dulcich and Chig O going right next to each other. Chig doesn't go to round 11. Evan Ingram went after, and Michael Mayer went right after. Both of these guys have pretty solid pedigrees, and they got the draft capital, the investment from their team. I understand, you got Sean Payton over there in Denver, and he's been raving about Dulcich, but it's just a little too early for me.
Well, I will concede that his ADP is 1203 at tight end 16. And I drafted him at the 9-1 as the tight end 11. So I took him about 3 rounds ahead of his ADP. I took him about 5 tight end slots ahead of his ADP. So I think that the eyebrow raise is fair. One part of it is just that I didn't have a tight end, and he was my highest rated guy left, which I'll go over in a second why that is. The second reason is just that I knew who we were in a draft room with, and there are several guys on that turn right next to me that I know are buying into all the same Dulcich propaganda that I am. And I just wanted my team to look a certain way when we got done with this exercise. And that was the guy I wanted to write up. That was the guy I wanted to, have in the screenshot. So that's kind of why I took him early. In a real draft, I'd be trying to trade back or maybe even roll the dice and see how it goes to the next pick at 10-12. But I just wanted to lock him up. I didn't feel like I was missing out a ton on other guys there. But the reason I'm so high on Dulcich is honestly, I think tight end 11 is even a bargain. Like I believe I have him. I don't have solid dynasty rankings, but I believe I have him as my tight end 9. And basically, I think he's a stud. He was a huge producer in college. He got that day 2 draft capital, which is a nice little bump for tight ends. And then as a rookie, he was actually super productive. I think it's easy to forget about it because he was hurt at the beginning of the year, he was hurt at the end of the year. And so the time that he was productive was right in the middle of the fantasy season. Not as vivid for people. It's not as memorable, but he was actually 5th in yards per game for rookie tight ends since the year 2000. The only rookie tight ends since the year 2000 with more yards per game than Greg Dulcich are Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, Jordan Reed, and Jeremy Shockey. So, he was impressive. Granted, on a smaller sample, I think he played 10 games, but I was really impressed with him as a prospect. I was impressed with him as a rookie. Recently, Sean Payton's come out and praised him, his versatility as a route runner. I think the offense is set to take a big step forward here. And a big thing for me is that the tight ends that Sean Payton brought in this offseason are blockers. He brought in Chris Manhertz and Adam Troutman, both of which have been pretty much exclusively blockers throughout their careers. And that tells me that they have a plan to utilize Dulcich on passing downs. You don't bring in a blocking only tight end unless you also have a receiving only tight end. And I think that's who Dulcich is. So I don't know. I think he's good. I think he's going to break out this season. And I think there's a good chance that someone like an Evan Ingram or Dalton Schultz outscore him for this season, but I'm really high on Dulcich long-term. And I think he can at least come close to those guys this year. So I was happy with the price, even though it was a bit of a reach.
Yeah, I think Dolchich has as good of a chance as anybody kind of in that range to, rise himself up to that mid tier, I guess you want to say, of tight ends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't, like I said, I really like your team, so I don't completely hate it. You reach and you get
Yeah.
your guy, but yeah, just
I appreciate
there.
you. You're really you're really, I can tell you're very nice because you're really like, you're like, this is what I think, but I don't want to like hurt your feelings. So like you can just give me the business. Like you tell me it was a terrible pick, 3 rounds ahead of ADP. Like what am I on? I don't know. But yeah, I think he has a good chance to get up into that like Pat Fryermuth zone of ADP at least by next year. I think people are going to see what he's got in his game this year. We can get a little bounce back from Russ. That would help too. All right. I think you've got one more guy that you want to kind of roast me on. So go ahead and hit me
Yes.
with that name because I'm excited to get to your side.
It's one of my least favorite players in the fantasy space right now, and it's gonna be Skyy Moore. Like I know this is a 14th round pick for you, but Skyy Moore is just, for me. There's just zero chance of actual fantasy relevance without injury. They drafted Rashee Rice. They still have Travis Kelce. Um, the rumors of DeAndre Hopkins. There's just so many other guys there that he there's no room for him to be any more than a gadget player.
Come on, Tim. The sky's the limit. The sky's
no,
the limit.
it is not.
No, I'm gonna push back right away here on the idea that there's too much competition. If anybody's getting in the way of Skyy Moore, it's Skyy Moore. But don't tell me Rashee Rice is one of the worst college prospects I've seen in my entire life. Okay. Now, granted, I've been a part of the fantasy space for only a few years here, but in my short time, I don't think I've seen a worse prospect go in the second round than Rashee Rice. Like that dude sucks. Like Skyy Moore might suck, but Rashee Rice sucks. Kadarius Toney is a glorified scat back. If you look at his reception perception, the dude can only run screenplays. Like Travis Kelce is the only target earner outside of maybe Jerick McKinnon in this entire offense. So I think he's got all the opportunity in the world. Whether he can capitalize on it, I'll give you that's a long shot. Like we don't see wide receivers struggle like that in their rookie years and then succeed as sophomores very often. I'll grant you that. Face planting, he face planted as bad as you can. Like he was going at the 108, 109 in rookie drafts, and now he's the last pick in the 14th round, and you're calling it a reach. So I trust me, his fall from grace is epic. I get that, and I think he's probably bad. Like I genuinely think 9 out of 10 times this goes really poorly for Skyy Moore and for me. But that being said, I just think at that point in the draft, he was one of the highest upside players left on the board. Like, I don't know. I don't feel the need to take somebody like a Romeo Dobbs who went shortly after, who I do think is more likely to be a solid NFL player than Skyy Moore, but I'm also completely confident is not a like good or even above average play. Like he is solidly average. Like if my goal was to achieve 9 points per game every year for the next 10 years, I would have drafted Romeo Dobbs. But that being said, at this point, like I'm drafting guys that I won't really feel that bad if I drop them to waivers a year from now. And so Skyy was just a guy I wanted to swing on because I did really like his production profile. Like he was a good college prospect, in my opinion. I think he was pretty impressive producer, granted at a smaller school. And when he did play last year, he was at least efficient on a per out basis. Like at least when he got on the field, he was getting targeted and he was converting those targets into yards at a solid rate for a rookie wide receiver. It really just comes down to why wasn't he on the field? And that I don't have a great answer to because Marquez Valdes-Scantling was awful last year. He ran all the routes. So I don't know why he couldn't get on the field, but at least I can tell myself the story that like maybe for whatever reason, the coaches were always planning to like give him a year off, or maybe he was going to play more, but he muffed a few punts and like they were punishing him by not letting him play, or they didn't trust his ball security. So they didn't let him play. It's a stretch for sure, but at least I can paint a picture where Skyy Moore becomes the, highest targeted wide receiver in a Patrick Mahomes offense as soon as this season. So I think it's appealing in that sense at wide receiver 65.
I get it. for me in that range, I see the upside you're talking about. For me in that range, I'm looking for a bye week filler. So like Romeo Dobbs, like you said, is more along my lines. I just want, a steady, they're not going to put up a goose egg in my lineup.
That's fair enough. Just difference of philosophy, I guess. Yeah, I'm still in that range of the draft where I'm still kind of swinging for the fences. So I was happy to get him there. Honestly, like I'm not even someone who's buying Skyy Moore. I'm not trying to go out and get him. I don't think the breakout is imminent. But at that price, I was like, if this was a real league, I'd be like, I'll add a share or two. I don't want to be at 0 on Skyy Moore if he does hit. So, a chance to get in on the ground floor, get in as cheap as he could possibly be. And like I said, I can drop him to waivers, but okay, fair enough. Those are my picks. That was my team. One more time, it was Mahomes, McCaffrey, Olave, Devontae Adams, Rhamondre Stevenson, J.K. Dobbins, Calvin Ridley, Matthew Stafford, Greg Dulcich, Sam Howell, David Montgomery, Elijah Mitchell, Nico Collins, Skyy Moore, and Dwayne McBride. Not sure why I felt the need to read the roster again, but there it is. I wish I could just put it on the screen for you, but I haven't figured out how to do that. And some of you are listening on Spotify. So just try to picture it in your head. Picture all that colorful little sleeper draft board as best you can. Let's get over to Tim's team here. I've been talking a lot. I'm going to give him a chance to go over his team and walk us through his draft. How did it go? Who did he take in the first round if it wasn't a quarterback? Tim, I am going to give you a choice here. Would you like to read off your own roster, or do you want me to do it for the people?
I'll read it off. Why not?
All right, hit me.
Okay, with the first round pick, I was really hoping for Justin Jefferson. Didn't quite get that to fall, but so it is what it is. We're taking Jamar Chase, solid consolation there at 110. Followed that up with Ceedee Lamb at the 2-3 and Daniel Jones at the 310. Got the stack right there with Saquon, his leading target from last year at the 4-3. Jared Goff at the 5-10. Michael Pittman, 6-3. Christian Kirk, Dalton Kincaid, Zach Charbonnet, Kendre Miller, Jonathan Mingo, Dalton Schultz, Jimmy G, Jaden Reed, and Jerome Ford to end it.
It's a solid squad. Why don't you walk us through a little bit just what was going through your head as you were putting this together? It was a slow draft, of course, so it wasn't like split second, but as we were working our way through, what were you thinking and what kind of team were you putting together here? And then hit us with a favorite pick and a least favorite pick.
Okay. So in the first round, I was really hoping to get a quarterback. Like I said before, it didn't quite fall. So I was kind of faced with the option of, okay, I can take Jamar Chase or reach on a quarterback. For me, Bijan right there at the 110 just doesn't feel right. So I'm not doing that. Decide to pass that decision off to somebody else. I don't quite feel good taking Deshaun Watson in the first round. I've been through quite a few dynasty startups this offseason, and for me, he's a second rounder. Didn't get either of those to fall, or didn't get Watson to fall, or Dak Prescott, which is kind of my cutoff tier for that second tier of quarterbacks, around QB 10 or so. And so I'm going to go with my wide receiver 3 in Dynasty. That's going to be Ceedee Lamb. Hoping, maybe the rest of my league isn't quite so high on these rookie quarterbacks to try to get that in the third round. Once again, it didn't work out. The first 3 or 4 rounds was straight pivots. But I like Danny Dimes, so I took him third. I really like him this year. I think he's got a solid chance to increase in value and get to that Dak Prescott tier of quarterbacks. I'm a big believer in Brian Daboll, so I went with that.
We'll circle back around to that one in a little bit.
All right. Saquon at the 4-3, I felt was a massive value. For me, he's my RB2 this season, and as long as he plays, he's going to be effective. Whether it's if I end up not being a competitor in my league, then that's still somebody you can trade for a first plus, and I'm totally fine with that in the first round. I do like what the Lions are doing over there. So going into the 5th round, I really needed another quarterback, and I didn't like my options. I really like what they're doing in Detroit with Jared Goff. Rumors of the contract extension are out there. I think they really built this offense around him to his strengths to allow him to succeed, to lead that offense. So I think this could end up being a pretty solid pick here in the 5th round. After that, we're going into the 6th, and I'm stuck between Chris Godwin, Michael Pittman, and Deontay Johnson. I went with Michael Pittman because I was so sure that I would get Deontay in the 7th round. And I severely underestimated the love DFF has for Deontay, which I'm all for it, but just not in a draft with me.
Right. So, yeah, that's kind of the spot I was in with Dulcich too. I was like, I guess I'm taking him now. Yeah.
So I've been seeing Deontay going like the 8th round of startups. And so I thought for sure the 7th round might have been a little bit of a reach. But so having to pivot, not getting Deontay, I took Christian Kirk there at 7-10. I felt like that was really good value. You took Calvin Ridley at the beginning of the round, and I just feel like it could really be a toss-up. I do think Calvin Ridley will be the alpha, but I don't think Christian Kirk will be a slouch either. I think he'll put up pretty solid numbers and at least be a wide receiver too. After that, David Njoku went at 8-1, and I knew that was my cue to take Dalton Kincaid at 8-3. For me, there's just no way Njoku should go before Kincaid. And then after that, I'm trying to fill out my RB2. And so I'm taking Zach Charbonnet and Kendre Miller, hoping one of these guys hits. I don't know what role Charbonnet is going to play in Seattle, but I know he's going to play a pretty solid, substantial role. Drafted him around the same spot that they drafted Kenneth Walker last year, and he's going to eat into that workload a decent amount, in my opinion. I don't know what's happening in New Orleans, but Kendre Miller is a really good running back, and so I expect him to get some work. If Kamara gets suspended, I expect him to be the main back. Mm-hmm. Following that up, Jonathan Mingo got really good draft capital. I know there's a lot to be desired with that production profile in college, but you look at the wide receivers drafted in the 2nd round around the same spot he was, and you're looking at guys like Michael Pittman. You're looking at guys like T. Higgins. Of course, there's some busts in there, and I think Mingo is probably a prime suspect
Denzel
to be
Mims.
a bust. Yeah, I think Mingo is a prime suspect to bust, but if he hits, I think T. Higgins really is his ceiling if he can hit. I'm not 100% sold on Dalton Kincaid, so I had to follow that up with the player I feel is most likely to lead the Texans in receptions and targets this year. So it's going to be Dalton Schultz. Jimmy G just to secure up that QB3. And then we're going to take a shot on Jaden Reed here at the end. I'm not really sold on what his role is going to be there in Green Bay, but there's really not a lot of depth behind him. I think the 14th round is more than a solid spot to get him. You know, going right next to Zach Evans and Samaje Perine. Yeah, I'll do it. And then I wanted Jaylen Warren, but I'll settle for Jerome Ford, the primary backup to Nick Chubb. If an injury goes down, or if an injury happens and Chubb goes down, Ford is taken over. There's really nothing else behind him after that.
Yeah, I like that pick there. So do you have a pick here that you feel was like your best? You know, everything just kind of came together, and the guy you like at a price that you like. Maybe Barkley was a guy that you mentioned you thought was a good value, but maybe you want to go another way with it.
Yeah, I'll have to go with Barkley right there. I'm not 100% confident in the rest of my team, but I really like the value I got on Barkley. I don't think there's any reason he should be dropping outside of the mid-3rd. Like, Barkley should be going right next to Drake London, in my opinion.
Yeah, funny enough, I would have liked your team better if you took Barkley at 310 and Daniel Jones at 4.3. But
I didn't get him. I thought for sure this turn right here, and I didn't. And Beeman ended up taking Tua right there, so I think he would have taken Daniel Jones as well.
So, what about your worst pick? Like, which one here would you want to take back and redo?
It would be the Pittman pick. If I can go back, I would have taken Godwin over Pittman. I don't feel bad not getting Deontay because I feel like him going at 6'7" was a little bit of a reach compared to consensus value. And it would I think Godwin really is the right pick right there.
Yeah, well, I was gonna ask you about Pittman. I will in a little bit, but I'm
Mhm.
gonna go ahead and start trying to poke some holes here in this team. Um, you know, we'll start with Ceedee Lamb, who I think is a good player, and I understand your rationale for taking him. I guess really this is just gonna come down to my evaluation of Kyler Murray versus yours, because I would take. You said you were looking at quarterback in the first round. It didn't work out. I get taking Chase there, but I feel like it just is really hard to come out of those first two rounds without a quarterback. Like I just feel like it really puts you behind the position. And Kyler is a guy that I'd be smashing there at 2-3. It does kind of lock you into more of a productive struggle build. I get that because he's probably not going to be a big contributor this year. So when you lock that much capital, your second round pick into a guy that you're not going to play a lot this season, it does limit your upside in that season. I just feel like he has so much of a potential to jump back into that first round discussion, by this time next year that I just can't pass up on him. So why don't you just tell me? Because I feel like other than that, like there's really nobody else I would argue with that you passed on. So like maybe just give me your evaluation of Kyler and what compelled you to pass on him there.
Well, first, I hate the way he runs. Um, but Kyler is just it's I don't dislike Kyler. I just feel that for a player like that to go in the second round, there's going to be dips in his value. Like he's not at his low right now, and so there's opportunities to buy back in. I think this Arizona situation is going to get a whole lot worse, and I think it's. I just feel like there's better value on the board right now, and players whose situation aren't necessarily changing
Yeah.
for the most part anytime soon. And it's just a little more certainty. That's all.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of think his value is at its bottom right now because you know, as he comes closer to playing off of the ACL, we usually do see players recover in value, like J.K. Dobbins did last year. Travis Etienne did as his return was anticipated. So I feel like when we get to like week 9, week 10, like at that point, it's going to be really hard to get Kyler. If he comes back late season and like maybe they rushed him back and he performs really poorly, I guess I could see another like little bit of a slide. But I also think people are already kind of baking in a lot of this season as a wash, where
Yeah.
I think that's maybe included in his price. Like we're looking at a guy who like prior to the ACL tear had literally been a top 6 fantasy quarterback points per game every year other than his rookie year, like three straight years. Um, he was actually a good passer, especially in 2021. He was actually like an MVP front runner for 10, 11 weeks of the season. So it's not like he's a guy who's just a fantasy weapon. Like he is a quality NFL quarterback, at least when you put decent weapons around him, a decent offensive line. Certainly capable as a starter, capable of winning games. So I don't know. He's the kind of guy like I'm just trying to get on teams as much as I can because I think, especially at his ADP, which is like late in the second round, I don't think there's a comparable bet that you can make like on a guy who you can get that late who could be in the prime of his career, you know, putting up multiple top 5 seasons. Like he was right there in the same conversation with Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert zone, a year ago, like 105, 106 in startup. So I don't know. I think that the discount is a little bit out of control, and I've been buying him like crazy. But again, it's just when it comes down to single players, like we're gonna have different takes. And I get if you don't like Kyler there, I definitely get the Lamb pick. Like he's definitely my next guy there.
Yeah. It's just not for me. Who knows what's going to happen with Kyler? Just not even this season, but beyond this season, right? If the Cardinals suck bad enough, they get the number 1 pick, they could be getting Caleb Williams because you're not going to not draft Caleb Williams. I don't
But
care
then
what anybody
Kyler,
says.
but then Kyler's going to get traded to some other team that's probably not as much of a dumpster fire as the Cardinals. Like I don't know, I see that as a positive thing. Like there's no world where he's not a starter in the NFL. Like he's absolutely. I think he's a top. I think he's like a fringe top 10 starter. But even if you don't think that, like at worst, he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL. I don't see a world where he's
Mhm.
not a starter. I don't think they're going to draft Caleb Williams and then just like make Kyler hold the clipboard. Like I think he's going to start somewhere, and it's not like if you take him away from Rondale Moore and James Conner, he's not going to be able to thrive. Like, I don't know. I think it's more likely that the Cardinals land Marvin Harrison Jr. next season and Kyler Murray's getting all the hype. Like, that's what I think is going to happen personally. But yeah, like I said, I get it. Like, it's just one of those guys. He's very polarizing. Some people are in, some people are out. I'm very much in. You're not. So you start out Chase Lamb. You come around 310. That's where you take Daniel Jones. That's going to be my next qualm, because like, I'm not a Daniel Jones guy.
You should be.
I don't think I should be, but let me give my case against him, and then you can give your case for him. So, okay, the thing about Daniel Jones is that he's never been good, which is like my number one problem. Like last year, he made this big leap from being absolutely garbage to being like average, which is cool. Like, good for him. He got a contract, but like, you're hitting, like, Brian Dable clearly made a difference for him, and he did improve going into his 4th season. But I guess I don't see where he can take his next step as a fantasy weapon, because when you look at last year, like, he was in that 18 point per game range, which was good enough to be like a low end QB1, kind of in the Geno Smith, Kirk Cousins zone. But he also outperformed expectation in terms of rushing touchdowns. Like, if he scored the amount of rushing touchdowns that he should have with his rush attempts and like where they were on the field, he wouldn't have had that many points per game. So like, there's regression coming in terms of his rushing touchdowns, which I could definitely see turning into some additional passing touchdowns. But the way I see it, like, that's just going to even out. He's going to end up in that 18 point per game zone again, unless he can make a massive leap as a passer. And I don't see that happening in year 5, especially with kind of the subpar weaponry they have around him. Like, they have a bunch of just kind of mediocre weapons: Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, just this like island of misfit toys that they've put around him. And I don't have enough faith in him as a player to improve so much as a passer to kind of make that like Josh Allen leap. And I think if he does what he did last year in terms of his fantasy output, I don't think he's going up. I think he's going to go down. I think he's going to sink back into the same range as the Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson, Jared Goff zone. So like, personally, I see his startup value it going down rather than up next year. I think he has a difficult path to jumping up into that Dak Prescott zone.
I do agree with you. I do think the rushing touchdowns will come down. But I don't think we talk about how little passing touchdowns he had last year. He only threw 15 passing touchdowns, right? I don't think it's outlandish or unreasonable to think he can throw 25 touchdowns, and kind of counterbalance that. I don't think his rushing yards are going down. I don't think his rushing attempts are going down. He did have career high pass attempts as well, passing yards, which is really not great because he didn't even throw 500 attempts, I don't think. So I do think there's tremendous room for improvement, not only in efficiency, but volume as well. And like I said, this move is 100% contingent on Brian Daboll, because I'm just such a believer in watching what he did with Josh Allen. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to make that leap, but that Josh Allen QB1 leap. But I think he can really easily fit into that Dak Prescott tier. And they gave him the extension. We know for sure there's an out after the 24 season. So we know we're getting 2 more years.
Yep.
Like for a fact. And I'm okay with taking that chance here in the 3rd round. If it doesn't work out, I likely have a very low draft pick for a dynasty team. And, maybe I can get Caleb Williams.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I can't argue it. It's really just going to come down to, like we're both saying, it's going to come down to, can he make that leap as a passer? And so it just comes down to, like, I'm skeptical of that. You're a little more of a believer in Dable. Apparently you're a believer in this whole offense, because you said you have Barkley as your RB2 projected, like for seasonal rankings. That's pretty bold compared to where his ADP is at. So you're definitely high on the Giants offense. I get that. I think it'll be hard for Barkley and Jones to both hit those expectations, unless unless Barkley's like catching 10 touchdowns or something. But But I get it. Every year we see these offenses kind of explode out of nowhere. Maybe they're the next ones to kind of do what the Eagles did this past year. You never know. I'm erring away from that. Still do love the value on Barkley though. I like the Barkley pick for sure at 4-3. I think that's really solid for what he can offer you. And we know he's a special talent. Like he's a special athlete. Maybe he plays a little bit longer than some running backs do. So I'm with you there. This next pick sounds like one we can kind of both just dunk on together, since you did say you were kind of anti the Michael Pittman pick. For me, it's like I don't see the upside with Pittman. Like, last year I get the quarterback play wasn't really very good, but Pittman was underwhelming. On his peripheral numbers last year. He had a high target share, but he wasn't doing much with it. He had a really low average depth of target. I don't know that he can maintain that type of a target share in a more downfield role. Not sure. But what I do know is he has a new quarterback who is both highly mobile and highly inaccurate, which are both not great things for wide receivers. And by the way, this quarterback was the second overall pick and is probably going to start a whole bunch of games for the Colts for several years. So it's like he's going off the board here at wide receiver 24. And for me, it's like wide receiver 24 seems like his best case scenario finish. Like I don't see how with a rookie mobile quarterback who doesn't know how to throw, he's going to finish better than wide receiver 24. And like if he's going into his age 26, age 27 season as like a low end wide receiver 2, I don't know. It's like, where's the room for growth? And like, what is he really adding to the team?
Yeah. I mean, I do like Michael Pittman. I was a really big believer in the profile and what I think he could have became in the NFL. I just think it was just a really negative move for him to have Anthony Richardson as his quarterback. Like you said, highly inaccurate, and it's going to be a whole lot of JT and AR. And it's going to be very negative for Michael Pittman compared to where he's going. Not just compared to where he's going, but compared to the people he's going around. Like I said, I would rather go with Godwin. I think Godwin is pretty solid with Baker. He just fits his play style a little bit better. I'm not seeing anything. I think best case scenario is a low end wide receiver 2 finish.
Yeah, it feels like for Pittman, it's like you're hoping he can be Godwin. You know what I mean? So it's like, we probably should have just gone with Godwin. But like I said, I did the same thing with Ridley. It's like these mid-round wide receivers, it's like a freaking riddle. I don't know. Last pick I'll kind of come at you with here is Dalton Schultz. And for me, this is like a roster construction question, right? I guess when I get to the Dalton Schultz pick, as I'm kind of moving down the board, I'm like, I don't see how it fits into the build that you're kind of putting together here. Where you have, like, prior to the Schultz pick, you got 4 rookies in a row with Kincaid, Charbonnet, Kendre, Mingo. And so it's like you've got this youth movement going, right? But then you also have, I don't know, you have some win now pieces with Barkley and Christian Kirk. So I guess with Dalton Schultz, it's less about Schultz and more of like an overall, like, what's the plan for this team? I guess is it a win now team? Is it a win later team? Because Schultz to me feels very like I'm in it this year and this is the best I could do at tight end. So I guess this is the guy that I'm going to have.
I like to build my teams pretty versatile and just, okay, Daniel Jones doesn't hit. Christian Kirk turns out he's not as good as everybody thought he was. He wasn't worth the money. All right, then I can look to sell Dalton Schultz, add a couple second-round picks or something to my team and just kind of pivot from there. I do think about my startup in terms of trading and just value overall. Like I said, I think Dalton Schultz is a pretty solid bet to increase in value. I think he has as good of a chance as any of these wide receivers to lead Houston in receptions this year. We know how these rookie tight ends these rookie quarterbacks like their tight ends. And I just really like the situation for him. And even if also I took a rookie tight end here at the 8-3 with Dalton Kincaid. If that doesn't end up working out because rookie tight ends hardly ever work out, then I also have that backup option that I really feel confident in.
That's fair enough. I do actually agree with the idea that the team you draft doesn't have to be the team you roll into the season with. So you absolutely have flexibility there. You can kind of get into one side or the other. I was talking about this just last week, so I don't know why suddenly this is a foreign concept to me. We were just talking about this with Jacob Sanderson. Like, you can kind of straddle two paths. You can consider, being competitive, rebuilding. You can kind of let everything play out and make that decision, right before the season, early in the season. So yeah, I'm with you there. Just pick up good values. I'm not a huge Schultz guy, but I think he's fine right where you took him. Like tight end 16 is, I think, perfectly fair for what he can offer you. Like, definitely not high ceiling, but he's going to have a steady diet of targets, and he's going to be there, Mr. Reliable guy you can count on to at least give you a handful of PPR points every week. So can't complain on the value. It's just more of a roster construction question. I think you had a good answer for it. So that kind of wraps up our teams. Really comprehensive look at how our drafts came together. Let's close things out today talking about some other things we noticed with the startup, some picks we like, some picks we didn't like. I'm going to start out with just one notable trend that really stuck out to me and kind of threw me off my game a bit, which is that in this mock draft, the quarterbacks were going early, really early.
Yeah.
So looking at like bulletproof ADP, basically every quarterback, starting with Daniel Jones and going right through to like Kenny Pickett, Matt Stafford, like all of them were going like 2 full rounds ahead of ADP. It was a really quarterback heavy draft. And the thing is, that does happen in draft rooms. Like, it's not a totally isolated concept. Like, ADP is a good guide, but your draft room can vary wildly. And so, I had to take Stafford at the 8-12 to be my QB2 because I just didn't want to be without a decent option there. And I was happy to get him at QB 27, but I definitely didn't want to take Matthew Stafford at 8-12. Like, there were players on the board that I'd much rather have than Matthew Stafford, but quarterback is one of those unique positions where you just kind of have to have them. Like, even if you are drafting for value in the startup, you don't really want to just say, oh, well, I'll just have one quarterback and I'll get one later, because it's really, really hard to trade for quarterbacks without giving one up in return. So it's one of those things where if everybody's going to reach a quarterback, you just kind of have to do the same thing. Did that kind of, I know you mentioned with Daniel Jones that you were, trying to get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud. So I guess that quarterback run kind of threw you off as well.
Yeah. Once CJ Stroud went, I knew I had to take one of these guys. I didn't expect Beeman to take Tua there at 4-1. I thought, Dynasty Patrol there at the 111 spot would take a quarterback, and he ended up punting his QB2. But it gets hectic in these draft rooms, and these quarterbacks start going, and you need a quarterback. It's not really an option. I mean, unless you're wild and crazy, I think going
exactly
0 QB is the craziest strategy you could do.
Yeah, I mean, I pushed it about as far as I could. I went with Stafford as my QB2, which I felt really good about. Like, I think he's a value right now. I think I got him at a good price. And then Sam Howell as my QB3, which is just like totally, shooting for the moon. I had very few options left after that. Like, Ritter was off the board. Mac Jones was off the board. It was basically like Sam Howell or Will Levis or Jimmy G or Tannehill. Like, those were my only choices. And I would have taken, if I had passed on Howell and Tannehill came back to me at 12-12, that's who I probably would have gone with. But Howell looks like the favorite to start. He's got a little bit of mobility. He's got good weapons in Washington. So I was like, whatever, like I'll take him as my QB3. I don't want my fake team to have a need at QB3. So I went ahead and grabbed him. But yeah, it was tough. It was tough keeping up with the QBs. They were flying off the board. Which brings me to our best and worst values here. I'll circle back around to my favorite team later. My best value was actually one of these quarterbacks, and it was Tua. I loved the Tua Tagovailoa pick at 4-1. I think at QB 15 where he went is probably right on, or sorry, QB 16 where he went is probably close to where he should be valued. But I just thought it was like a really good place to get him. I think he deserves to be kind of in the same realm as Bryce Young and CJ Stroud in terms of value, just based on how they play. He's still very young. We've seen him post a high-end efficiency season. He has one of the best wide receiver cores in the league. I guess the concussion stuff is really impacting his price, because otherwise, like if you remove that, I don't really see a reason to take Stroud or Young over Tua. Um, so how do you feel about Tua? Is he somebody you're maybe avoiding due to the medical stuff? You did mention you were maybe looking at picking him, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not scared at all of the concussion stuff. Like, it kind of stuff. It doesn't happen at that rate that it happened in Miami last year, but these things happen. And he seems fully ready to play football for the next, at least to finish his rookie contract. Looking back on it, no, I'll still take Daniel Jones over Tua. But
Stick to your guns, yeah.
but
Yeah, I'll
I
take
do
Hopkins,
like Tua a lot.
Yeah, I like Tua. I'm not really putting much stock into the concussion thing. Like, he's not necessarily in the range where I'm normally trying to buy him in established leagues. I'm usually aiming maybe a little bit higher, but I do like him, and I think he's a good quarterback. Like, I think he's a quality passer who is even more heightened by having a good coach and having really explosive weapons. And I guess I just feel like he's close to the best case scenario for Young and Stroud. Like, I don't know what we're hoping for from them, because we know that they're not runners. And so, to be leading the league in passing efficiency and, throwing at a really high rate to really quality weapons, like, it kind of seems like the situation that we hope Young and Stroud are in a couple years from now. And so I almost would rather just take Tua. I wouldn't take him over them in a startup because I know how the market value is, and I'd rather just
Right.
take a Young or a Stroud and then try to parlay that into an elite guy, get into a Watson or a Lawrence or something like that. But just in a vacuum, I just don't see a big gap. Like, I see those three guys as like carbon copy, like same kind of guys, really high IQ guys who can win, with their arms, not really going to run. So yeah, I thought that was a good value. Was there somebody that you saw as just a really solid pick? Doesn't have to
Um,
be quarterback, just whatever, any position.
yeah. Yeah, we're gonna go just based on market value. I'm gonna roll with CJ Stroud at the 3.9.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I do like CJ Stroud. He was my QB1 pre-draft. I'm kind of nervous about Houston trading away their first round pick next year, but CJ Stroud is very good. I don't expect him to be elite by any means, but I've been seeing these rookies go at the early third, late second multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see him fall down to 309, it just feels like a great value for a team that doesn't have a quarterback yet.
Yeah, that was value by ADP at least. He is typically going at the 304. He went here at the 309. Definitely agree. It's a good price for him. Regardless of how I view him via Tua, I do think just in his own right, I think that's a very solid pick there. And unfortunately, forced you into the Daniel Jones pick, which if this were a real league, I think you'd be regretting at some point. But fortunately, it's not. Another good value I saw was Dalton Kincaid, taken by my very special guest here at the 8-3. I love that pick. Getting him after David Njoku is just kind of wild to me. Like, I think he's very clearly worthy of being taken higher than that. Like, we know what Njoku is. I like him for this season. I think he's he's kind of a Dalton Schultz plus, if you will. Like, I think he's kind of in that same mold of like, we know he's a good player, who has an established role in an offense, but I don't really think that he's going to have a massive ceiling. And so he's just kind of a guy you take where it's like, you don't want to take zeros at the position. You want to have at least a baseline of production. Kincaid has the upside. Like,
yeah.
and it was a value. He's typically going as the tight end 7. You got him at the tight end 9. You got him about almost a full round past his ADP. So I think that's a really solid pick. It's probably not going to happen for him year 1, but we could very easily see some flashes, some promising stuff that just shoots his price up of, a round or 2 heading into the next year. History has been pretty kind to these early drafted tight ends. As long as they can really do anything as rookies, they're going to pick up some value. They're going to be hard to trade for. So I like that you're able to get in on him at a good price. Do you have one more good value? Or go ahead, talk on Kincaid and then hit me with another one.
Yeah, I know there's multiple people that I've seen him go in rookie drafts as like the 109, which for me is a bit of a reach. So there's some Kincaid truthers out there that think he's really going to just, make Dawson Knox a nobody and completely be the number 2 option in that offense. And I think you can get really great value for him. If not this year, probably next year. As long as he does something, as long as he flashes something like you said this year, then it'll be fine.
Exactly. I mean, Chigakonkwo, he's obviously lower down the board, but he was like basically undrafted in dynasty startups, and he caught like 30 passes in his rookie season, and now he's going in like the 8th or 9th round. So I don't know. It can go like, you can just go right to the moon. You don't have to do much, especially if you play in an offense with Josh Allen. Like, it's not going to take a lot to get that ball rolling. So I think that's a good pick. And do you have one more value for us before we switch over to some really gross picks?
Well, you called out my guy, and I said earlier, Davante Adams at the 412. That's wide receiver 18 off the board. Just absolutely ridiculous. If I don't know anybody's dynasty rankings who has Davante Adams outside of their top 12, or at least their top 15. Like I said, he doesn't rely on speed or athleticism to win. As long as he has a decent quarterback, which is really the big question, I think if the Raiders don't bring in somebody this year, he's probably going to request a trade to try to get on a contender because, who wants to play for a middling Raiders team with no quarterback? Not Davante Adams. That's not what he does. So, I'm all for Davante Adams right there at the 412. I think it fits your build perfectly. I think the value is perfect. And I think it's almost unfair that he fell to you.
Well, I appreciate the shout. I was definitely happy to get in there, especially with the way I was building the team. The crazy thing is, though, his ADP is 411. That's his actual startup ADP.
That's not right.
I mean, I don't think it's right morally, but it is right factually. Like, he is going there. It's kind of crazy. And I think he should be going higher. Maybe not like massively higher, but at least like early 4th round, I think, is where he belongs. And
Christian Watson went before Davante Adams.
Well, that
doesn't make you feel like anger inside.
It makes me feel a little bit angry, and I'm gonna call out my very good friend Ben Winkler here, who has been on the show multiple times. And I'm gonna say, Ben, you should know better. Why did you take Christian Watson ahead of Davante Adams? And I can tell you what he's gonna say. He's gonna say, "Well, I was trying to do a productive struggle. I wanted a tankier one." Okay, well, you took Travis Kelce in round 3. So what are you doing? What are you doing, bro? You could have started out Jalen Hurts, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Travis Kelce, Davante Adams. I mean, that would have just been like absolutely fire right out of the gate. I think he had a bit of a misstep. I think he would fess up if we had him on the show here. We're gonna kick off worst values with Christian Watson at 411, and I like Christian Watson, and it's not even that far off from his ADP, but just by virtue of taking him ahead of Davante Adams, that gets you put on the worst values. So, sorry, Ben, do better. That was just at least one slot too high to take Christian Watson, because it made my team look a whole lot better on paper. So I do appreciate it. What about you, Tim? Do you see a value on the board that just kind of makes you scratch your head?
It was funny. I actually had Christian Watson down as my worst value too until I looked at the show sheet and seen you had him down. So I'm going to go with Elijah Moore right here at the 908. Don't get me wrong. It's a wide receiver 43. I don't think you're investing too much, but Elijah Moore here at the 9.8. You're looking at the guys who went after him: Rachaad White, Zach Charbonnet, Mike Evans, Tyler Lockett. I'll take Mike Williams over Elijah Moore. I just think he's being really overvalued right now due to this training camp hype, and it's just too much of a reach for myself. It's too much for me.
Yeah, I'm an Elijah Moore. I guess fan is maybe too strong. I'm tentatively interested in Moore, but the market certainly agrees with you. This is almost 2 full rounds ahead of his ADP. He's normally going at the 1106 as the wide receiver 47. Doc got him here at the 9.8, so well ahead of the consensus. And I agree. I would have taken a lot of the guys listed after ahead of Moore. I think he's intriguing. I think he had a really good prospect profile. I think he had an interesting rookie year. And what you're really hoping for is that there was just some shenanigans with the coaching staff and stuff last year, and that's what explains away the poor production. Definitely not a foolproof argument by any stretch, but it's there, and I think there's some merit to it. If we see the Deshaun Watson of old, we could really see somebody like Elijah Moore thrive in the Browns offense. But again, it's just like it's not a market win. It's a really early pick, and I think there were some more impact players you could have taken in that range for sure. For me, my last value or lack thereof would be Kirk Cousins, who went at the 5'4", QB 17. I certainly don't mind Cousins as the QB 17. There's not any quarterback that went after him that I'd say, wow, you really need to take that guy over Kirk Cousins. It's more so just the range that he went in. I feel like Doug was a little bit desperate for quarterback there. And I think what he passed over was maybe some more difference making production at other positions like Jerry Jeudy, Najee Harris, George Kittle. These are guys that I think have a little bit more merit at their positions. Whereas with Cousins, it's like, you know what you're getting. You're going to get like a low end QB1 at best for maybe a couple of seasons. You know, he's 34. He's going to be 35 this year. We know he doesn't have that high end ceiling. I'm just not sure what we're really banking on here with Kirk Cousins in the early 5th round.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, Kirk Cousins is just the end of that tier. Like, I don't think a lot of people consider Jared Goff to be in that same tier where like Geno Smith is. I think Kirk Cousins is really that cutoff. And so like from that angle, I can kind of understand it. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I think there's too many more impactful dynasty players on the board.
Yeah, I think people need to flip that around. I don't think he's the end of a tier. I think he's the beginning of this tier. That's the thing for like I think Cousins is at the beginning of this tier. And honestly, I could hear arguments that he's not even the beginning, but he's certainly in the tier with Jared Goff, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, potentially Trey Lance, depending on how you feel. Like that's where I'd put him. I don't really see any reason to put him above those guys. We know Cousins is going to top out at like 18 points per game. He's not young. I don't know. I don't really see the appeal. Like it's just consistency. Like people like consistency, but when you look ahead into the future, I guess I don't see any reason why Jared Goff isn't going to be posting the same types of numbers. I don't see why Geno Smith's not going to post the same types of numbers. These are both quarterbacks that are younger than Cousins. They both have comparable, if not better, weaponry around them. So I'd much rather just wait and see who comes back around to me. Cousins is not a guy I'm building a team around. He's certainly not a guy I'm afraid to miss out on. Like I'll just let somebody else draft him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Are we twins? Like, I feel like we're kind of in the same mind space.
Yeah.
I'll pass on it. You know, I'll wait on Derek Carr. I'll wait on Aaron Rodgers. And you'll probably get similar production.
I mean, how about Matthew Stafford? Not to toot my own horn, but like Matthew Stafford 3.5 rounds later. Like, they're the same age. Like, I don't understand. They're the same age. They both basically have an offense with like one really good wide receiver and then some other stuff. And like he's had a higher ceiling throughout his career. I don't know. I think people are maybe overthinking this one a little bit, but why don't you give us one more guy that you didn't love, and then we'll close it out with our favorite teams.
Yeah. I know a lot of people may not like it, but it's going to be Michael Thomas. Like Michael Thomas went at the 11-5, the wide receiver 48, which, you know, take a shot on your guy, I guess. But can we just let Michael Thomas go? He's done. He's done.
I cannot let Michael Thomas go.
Go.
This was not my pick, but I will defend Chris's honor here. Well, first I will say it was a reach. So Michael Thomas ADP is wide receiver 60. He took him at wide receiver 48. He probably had the same feeling I had with Dulcich, which is like all of us over there on that side of the board kind of think the same way. Probably was worried I was going to take Thomas. He was probably worried, you know, Malcolm was going to take him. So he probably reached for that reason. He just wanted to have Thomas on his team. That being said, I do think there's some merit to Michael Thomas, especially at his actual ADP, wide receiver 60, which I think is just outrageous. You're like taking him around guys that might never even have like a top 50 season at wide receiver. I'd rather just take the guy that I know has talent and like, yeah, maybe he can never put himself back together. Maybe he's Humpty Dumpty and all the King's horses and all the King's men can't, you know, get his ankle reattached correctly. But if they can, like he played 3 games last year and he was right where he was before, like high end wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 1. So I at least understand the bet of like, what if he just stays on the field, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we've all been burned many times by Michael Thomas. It doesn't feel great to have him. He's 30 years old. You know, this is kind of the last ride. Like if he can't stay on the field this year, it's over. He's going to go to 0. It's just really what's your risk tolerance at that point.
Yeah. My risk tolerance is not the 11th round. You know, I'm gonna just name the guys that went in the 12th round because it's still bad. You know, give me Jacoby Myers, Tank, Bigsby, Khalil Herbert, Tyler Algier, Rashee Rice. You know, the list goes on.
I do like Tank Bigsby, who I would have taken. I would have taken Tank over him. I would have taken a few of these guys over for sure. I think it was a little early, but I like the mindset on that at least. You know, I like the thought process there. I'm actually going to call out this team. This is Chris's team, draft director. You probably know him on Twitter at Chris Miles 1017. I think he drafted a really solid team here. He's got Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews up top. Got a nice little stack to start things out, which is certainly not necessary, but it's a nice little twist. And then he went ahead and grabbed Jahmyr Gibbs and Tony Pollard. Then Jerry Jeudy got Geno Smith at his QB2 at a pretty solid price, I think. And then he just started soaking up value, like Deebo Samuel, middle of the 7th round, Jamison Williams, middle of the 8th, Keenan Allen in the 9th. He grabbed Desmond Ridder as his QB3 as that quarterback position was kind of drying up. Michael Thomas, not so much of a value as we've said. But then Tank Bigsby, Wan'Dale Robinson, Ryan Tannehill as his 4th quarterback, which I don't think he necessarily needed in this build, but I think that is really good value on Tannehill as like obviously the last guy left who can play and who's going to be a quality starter for at least part of the year. And then he closes it out with Jerick McKinnon. I think this is just a really solid team, like top to bottom. He's got that elite tight end. He has the elite quarterback. He's got a very solid backup quarterback. He's got just a kind of a stable of wide receivers, no clear superstars, but like all guys that can contribute. He's got some upside mixed in there. And then I love the tandem of Gibbs and Pollard. So that's probably my favorite team outside of my own, obviously. But Tim, do you have a team that sticks out to you, or you think they just did a really nice job start to finish?
Yeah, I was gonna say, draft director as well, but really, Chris in fantasy here at the 1-7 spot. I really like that team. I think it's versatile as well. Up until the double tight end take, the double tight end take was a little much for me. I don't like the direction of that, and I wish they would have taken a quarterback there. But
yeah, I'll go through the roster here just so they can kind of get the mental picture. We've got Trevor Lawrence here at the 1-7, followed by Breece Hall, Drake London, Cooper Kupp. We got George Kittle, Dallas Goedert, Brock Purdy, Jahan Dotson, Aaron Jones, Devin Achane, Josh Downs, Rondale Moore, Luke Musgrave, Trey McBride, and Isaiah Likely. So we've got 5 tight ends and 15 picks, which is a little bit outrageous, but I do really like how it looks up top. Like I absolutely love the value on Drake London and Cooper Kupp. I think Kittle and Goddard were both good prices. Taking the 2 tight ends is kind of a philosophical question. Yeah, so I think it just comes down to where you're at with like how you like to build. But I think both of these guys in tight end premium are actually like really solid values. It just does put you at a little bit of a disadvantage in that, like you said, that QB2 spot with Brock Purdy. 7-7 for Brock Purdy is a little early for me, and it's definitely a precarious spot with your backup quarterback, but otherwise very solid roster.
I think with these tight ends, it's really hard because for me, you don't spend 5th and 6th round capital on a tight end to play the matchup. This is a guy that's going to be stuck in your flex, and it could be hit or miss often with one of these guys. We know how Kittle can be. We know Goddard gets injured a lot. And I would rather just have one. That way I only have to fill one position and not have to worry about, having a tight end and a flex I have to fill in case of injury with these guys who are been known to get injured. I think Goddard has yet to finish a full year, and similar to Kittle, I don't think he's finished a full year either.
Yeah, I think to justify the picks, you definitely have to be kind of planning to put them in your flex. And so, in tight end premium, if they hit their potential, that can definitely be comparable to the wide receivers going in that range, but it really needs to work out. Maybe it's a trade piece for later, a team that wants to contend but is kind of lacking at that tight end spot. Maybe maybe he's thinking he can pivot that, for a nice haul later on down the road. Not super sure, but overall, definitely a solid team. A lot of these are really good teams. Like I said, I wish I could put the whole board up here, but the draft startup guide is going to be coming out in July. It's going to be based around this draft board, write-ups for every player. So I think you're going to want to check that out. But now you know how my team looks. You know how Tim's team looks. And if you want to see the rest of those teams, you can check that out. Tim, this has been a little bit of a ride tonight, but it's been a fun one. It's been good. We've had a good time. And I think we really knocked that startup draft out of the park here. So thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Why don't you tell the people one more time where they can find any of your work? Obviously, you're a Dynasty Football Factory, but give them your socials. Tell them about your other podcasts.
Yeah, of course. Once again, thanks for having me on, Paul. I really appreciate it. Honor, privilege, and I had a blast. You guys can give me a follow at ff_Rees on Twitter. Of course, the work I'm doing over at the Dynasty Football Factory. And then I'm also got a few articles coming out for the FF League winners, doing that, as well as my podcast. I do one episode a week, Fantasy Frontline at Frontline_FF on Twitter. And got a couple other things coming down the pipeline. I'm still working on my Dynasty Football for Beginners series. So that's coming out on DFF. Make sure to check that out when it comes.
Awesome. Love it. All right. For me, just follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. Ask me about the show. Tell me what you think of the show. You hit me up with some questions, some possible show topics. Do my job for me. I'd appreciate it. If you're enjoying the show, leave a comment on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, follow the Spotify, all that great stuff. Anything you can do to show your support really means a lot. We want to keep growing this thing, want to keep making it bigger, bringing more audience involvement into it. So, I appreciate all the support so far. Let's keep it rolling. Next week, I am going to have another special outside guest. If you're familiar with him, Dynasty Zoltan. He's got a nice podcast of his own, the Dynasty Zoltan podcast. I've been on it a couple of times. I thought I'd bring Mike over to my show. It's going to be really cool. We're going to talk all about running backs next week. We've got some tiers to break down. So come back for that next week. One more shout out for Tim. Follow him on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter. And I will see you guys next week on the Factory Tour.